Welcome to the Clutch Kitten Gaming Podcast, where I play an indie game for 5 hours and let you know whether or not it's worth your time and money. Hello and welcome. This is James, also known as Clutch Kitten, and I am stoked you're here with me today. I'm in a great mood right now. I'm recording episode 12 of the podcast. It's the weekend, and tomorrow is the first day of autumn. I'm not sure what it looks like where you live, but here in the Pacific Northwest, the air gets crisp, the weather's a little cooler, and the season provides a wonderful excuse to go down to the pumpkin patch and drink a few extra hot toddies. For some reason, it also makes me want to play games like Stardew Valley, but believe it or not, the story this week isn't just me reminiscing about autumn's past. Our story this week is about the PlayStation Classic. Sony has finally jumped on board with the classic console train that Nintendo had started, and they announced the release of the miniaturized PlayStation 1. Apparently it's 45% smaller than the original console, and it will come preloaded with 20 games playable in their original format. A few of those games include Final Fantasy VII, Ridge Racer Type 4, Tekken 3, and a bunch of others. The original PlayStation actually came out the year I was born, so most of my early gaming was done on the PS2 and the SNES, and not the PlayStation 1, but the mini console is honestly incredibly tempting. It's cute, looks old school, and it also works on modern TVs, and it's only $100 here in the US. Before we jump into this week's review, I want to remind all of you to shoot me any gaming-related questions to clutchkittengaming@gmail.com. Also, if you enjoy the podcast, consider putting a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. It helps out a whole lot. Now on to this week's game. Today's game is called Bunker Punks. I dare you to try saying that 10 times fast, because you'll end up talking about some sort of younger monks or something weird like that. This is a single-player, retro, roguelite FPS with light base building mechanics. Let's break that genre down for a second. If you remember from a few episodes back, we talked about the distinction between a roguelite and a roguelike. Basically, Rogue, the game the genre was named after, had specific elements including procedurally generated levels, turn-based combat, permadeath, and a bunch of others. Roguelikes then are aptly named because they tend to be games that include most of those core elements. Roguelites, on the other hand, are games that include a few of those elements, but not enough to be called a roguelike. The genres are basically as close in gameplay as they are in spelling. So Bunker Punks is a retro roguelite first-person shooter. The retro is thrown in because it actually feels like a game from the 90s, a first-person shooter that feels super nostalgic and old school. This game was in early access for a long while, but it was officially released as the 1.0 version on May 28th of this year. It was developed by a guy named Shane Neville, who goes by the developer name Ninja Robot Dinosaur. Apparently he's been developing games since 1997, and before he founded NRD, he worked on a bunch of games including Need for Speed and Company of Heroes. In 2010, Shane founded NRD and pursued his dream of independent development. He's located in Vancouver, BC, and in addition to Bunker Punks, he's developed Shellraiser, which I believe is a mobile game, and a game called Ray Ardent Science Ninja. Bunker Punks currently costs $14.99 on Steam, and HowLongToBeat.com doesn't have enough data to say how long this game takes most people, but for me, I'm in a little over 5 hours, and I still haven't fully beaten a run, or even unlocked half of the items, so I'd say there's quite a bit of gameplay available. There's both mouse and keyboard and gamepad support. I personally played with the mouse and keyboard, which felt pretty good, but for those of you who prefer a controller, there's that option as well. Let's move on to the narrative. It's 2019, a mere 3 months from right now, and the economy is collapsing. Not just America's economy, but the entire world's. Civilization is going into disarray, and what's left is chaos. As time goes on, there begins to emerge a league of corporations, who like cockroaches remained untouched by the fall of life as we know it. They first appeared as a beacon of light to those who had no other options, but they quickly showed their true colors as oppressive rulers aimed to milk humanity for all it's worth. That's where you come in. Rather than succumb to the fascist propaganda thrown at you on a daily basis, you decide to make a stand and fight. You're a rebel by nature who decides to put up both middle fingers to the rich and recruits a group of revolutionaries. You represent the people, the proletariat, the oppressed, and as a beginning to your rebellion, you raid corporate strongholds to stock up on supplies and build your bunker headquarters. This game is set in a near dystopian future where mega corporations rule the world. The actual locale of the game seems to be in the desert somewhere, but the only actual clue of that is the level map and one of the characters being from Texas. There are 6 primary characters you can play, 4 of which I've unlocked, so I'll tell you about those. First, there's Molly Pop, who's your basic, well-rounded pistol slinger. Her eye patch is just one indication of her experience in fights. Next, you have Dallas Beach, a shotgun-loving heavy hitter from Texas. You start out with the shotgun and he loves to shoot his way through the opposition. Third, you have Cleopatra Rex, a sharpshooting rifle expert who starts out with an assault rifle. She is the queen of the group and definitely isn't afraid to let the corporate scum know. The last character I have unlocked is Cassidy, who's a pistol pro with good armor and isn't afraid to attract attention as she wears a red dress into battle. So far the characters are fun. They each have their own attitude, which comes through in their few voice lines, and they also have their own unique special abilities and stats. I actually want to stop here quickly to tell you about my first major complaint of the game. I didn't unlock my 4th character until over 5 hours into the game. You start with 2 and unlock the 3rd very quickly, which is great, but it took me forever to unlock the 4th, and the 5th and 6th characters are still unknown to me. I did expect the 4th to be spaced out some, but I didn't expect it to take over 5 hours to unlock. Now to be fair, I'm not a hardcore FPS player, I'm not Rambo when it comes to these games. I definitely don't have the perfect strafe jumping strategy or aim, but I'm also not a terrible player. I also understand that most roguelites are designed to have a slow and almost grindy start, so I expected it to take a bit of a grind for the 4th character. But it started to be frustrating to me that after like 5 hours of gameplay, I still hadn't gotten an additional character. The core of this issue, I realized, actually comes down to the permanent upgrade system, and we'll get into that more later. What is the crux of the story? Why are you fighting through hordes of corporate drones and robots? Well, obviously because you're an absolute badass and you're not one to follow orders. That message comes through in a variety of ways. In addition to the large chunk of backstory you get at the beginning of every run, you're going to learn about the world through a variety of means. First of all, the loading screen between floors generally contains a small bit of lore. Second, you'll receive some story context through your character and their voice lines. Although they don't talk much, they do have the occasional one-liner, which helps add to your ability to roleplay as one of these punks. When I play as Dallas Beach, I feel like a bloodthirsty yet humorous cowboy in the future who wants to take down the man. The last primary way that the game helps you learn about the world is through propaganda posters. Those are strewn throughout each of the levels, and they're such a brilliant and amazing addition to the game. Let's look at a few examples. One says, "Report delinquency. Delinquents get downsized." Another says, "Safety. Why we built the wall." That sign in particular felt like it extended to the real world America, but I will say no more. Another sign showed a picture of the Proxy Man, which is an enemy you fight, and it says to observe and control. In addition to all the different propaganda posters, there also are wanted posters for the characters you're currently playing. If you've played XCOM 2, there's a very similar mechanic where you can make posters or take pictures, and those will actually show up in-game. I love that the developer chose to put these posters in. They're funny, they make you feel like you're in an oppressive future, and add to the feeling of being an outcast. You might already know the answer to this question, but is the story important to the game? The plain and simple answer is no. The game almost completely hinges on the quality of gameplay that it brings to the table, and that's okay. When I look to play an FPS, especially a roguelite FPS, narrative is secondary to the shooting mechanics entirely. Let's look at Doom 2016 as an example. I will most likely reference it again a few more times. All that I remember from the game story-wise is that you're the Doomslayer who doesn't give a crap about anything except killing all the demons that have invaded the Mars base. What's amazing about Doom 2016 is that you get just enough story to be able to imagine yourself as this badass space marine, and no more, because what makes the game top-notch is the stellar gameplay. In a very similar way, Bunker Punks gives you the context for feeling absolutely fabulous about killing thousands of robots and corporate drones, and then it relies heavily on the actual gameplay and mechanics. Lastly, is the narrative well written overall? As we've talked about, there isn't a whole lot of story to evaluate, but what's there is written well. I don't think a Ninja Robot Dinosaur took the story too seriously, and that comes through in the writing in a very positive way. Let's move into gameplay. There are two main facets to the Bunker Punks gameplay. First is fighting through levels, and second is bunker building. But let's zoom out even more to look at the main flow of the game first. As this is a roguelite, most of the gameplay is run-based. You choose your character, and you load into the first building. Once you fight your way through the first 2 floors of that building, you return to your bunker. This is where you can spend credits, the in-run currency, to build and upgrade your bunkers as well as buy items. Once you're done building and shopping, you head over to the raid map and choose your next location to target. Then you fight your way through those floors, and if you survive, you go back to your bunker to shop and build more, or if you die, that run is over and you come out of the run with any tech you picked up. Tech is the permanent out-of-run currency which allows you to unlock new bunker upgrades, weapons, and armor for future runs. Now let's take a look at the actual combat. This game not only looks like an old-school FPS, but it plays like one as well. It's fast-paced, and movement is incredibly important to your success. Due to the procedural generation of levels, you don't know exactly where to go in order to reach the elevator, but the map seems to be pretty intuitive overall. Sometimes I would go into a dead-end room, but it was never all that frustrating to backtrack due to the speed of movement and the ability to get loot in every room you go to. As you get further along in a run, the main changes you'll see are environmental items and enemy variety. When you enter a room, there often are walls or platforms to move around on, and generally the room contains chests, explosive barrels, or other similar items. In some later buildings I went to, there started to be more variety in objects, such as larger explosive barrels and these explosive chambers which leaked acid when they were shot. Similarly, there's more variety in enemies as you get further along in a run. I think the enemy design is one core strength of the game. There's already a wide variety, and I haven't even seen them all yet. There's floating enemies that try to get close to you and explode. There's these corporate drones, which are dudes with guns that shoot 2 bullets in rapid succession. There are multiple kinds of turrets. There are big dog-like creatures that chase after you, and the list goes on and on. What makes it such a strong point in the game, I think, is the way that it changes your playstyle based on what you're fighting. Once you get to know an enemy, you learn its patterns and weaknesses. For example, there's this floating robot enemy which follows after you, and once it's next to you for long enough, it emits an electrical pulse that damages you. They're actually incredibly harmless until they get close to you, and you learn the amount of time you have before they shock you. Due to their pattern, they naturally force you to kill them or keep moving away. Similarly, every enemy has patterns which force you to jump, dodge, or move, otherwise you'll take a lot of damage. This leads us into talking about weapons, which also have a huge effect on your playstyle. There are melee weapons, like bats and swords, but from my experience, the majority of gameplay is done with guns. I haven't unlocked all the weapons yet, but there's already a pretty decent variety of them. There's revolver, pistol, hunting rifle, pump shotgun, rocket launcher, assault shotgun, assault rifle, grenade launcher, and so on. If you've played any FPS, you're probably familiar with how most of these guns play. But what really differentiates an okay shooter from an amazing shooter is how the gun feels to shoot. Is there nice feedback? How does the gun sound? Does the gun look cool? How do the bullets interact with enemies? The gunplay in Bunker Punks felt great. It does have pretty pixely graphics, so I can't say the guns looked insanely cool, but for the art style they looked good. I was excited every time I picked up a new weapon, and the way they interacted with enemies was strong. Pixel blood would spray off of people, and the robots exploded nicely. When I would shoot flying enemies, they would be knocked back from the impact of the bullets, and the guns sounded terrific. The funny thing is, when it came to melee weapons, I think I've picked up a bat once or twice, and I just recently unlocked the katana. As a result, I really can't speak much to the quality of melee battling, but I will say that you have to be pretty ballsy to use those weapons. Many of the enemies become much more deadly when you get into melee range, so that's really sketchy to do. You have less time to dodge bullets, there's a high chance of taking explosive damage, and enemies like the huge dog will claw at you. All the more props to you if you go through the game using just a bat or katana. Let's talk briefly about what kind of loot and items drop, and then we'll move on to the bunker building. When you kill an enemy, shoot a box, or open a chest, you'll get one of a few different things. One thing you might get is ammo, which is actually pretty easy to come by. The only weapon which I had to pay extra attention to when it came to ammo management was the rocket launcher with only 8 rockets. The second thing you might get is weapons. You'll have a chance to get any weapon that's currently unlocked. Third, you might get credits, which you use to build up your bunker, buy weapons in your bunker area, or healing. Fourth, you might get tech, which can be used out of run for permanent unlocks. Fifth, you might get health, which is honestly a pretty rare drop. And lastly, you might get armor. Armor in this game actually comes in the form of clothes, which you can equip to your head, body, hands, and legs. Each item has a different stat, whether it's a percentage boost in shotgun damage, or a combination of rocket launcher damage and armor boost. The actual look of the item doesn't matter at all since the game is in first person, but if you don't care about the bonus, maybe you would rather wear a motorcycle helmet than a construction cap. Armor actually was relatively easy to come by, but finding the exact item you wanted wasn't always easy. Now that we've talked about combat and what it looks like to raid a building, what do you do when you get back to the hole in the ground? The bunker aspect actually reminded me a lot of Fallout Shelter, the mobile game, as it's a side view of your entire base. When you get to the bunker, you can spend credits you picked up while raiding on crafting new rooms or on buying specific weapons and armor you want. I haven't unlocked all the rooms yet, but let's take a look at what a couple of them do. You can build an infirmary ward, which gives you a passive bonus of 5 health every time you move up a floor in-game. Within the infirmary, you can purchase a few different upgrades, one of which increases your punk's max health, and another gives you the benefit of gaining life every time you perform chain kills. Another room you can build is a shooting range, which passively allows you to carry 2 instead of just 1 gun, and you can upgrade that room further to improve damage to specific types of weapons, whether it be shotguns, pistols, rifles, or explosive weapons. In addition to those 2 rooms, there are rooms that help you improve things like your speed, armor, and even unlocks your ultimate ability. The way you build your bunker is incredibly important for your run because it can make the difference between you making it through the next building or failing. What's awesome is that it gives you a pretty wide variety of improvements that can change your playstyle. I tend to go for the healing combo upgrade even though it's expensive. Health is hard to come by in the game, so being able to heal from chain kills is incredibly helpful if you can set it up. It would make me play much more aggressive as a result in order to kill a number of enemies in rapid succession, as opposed to trying to pick enemies off one by one. That playstyle actually bit me in the ass a few times, but the fact that it changed how I played was awesome. I still have yet to dig deep into the bunker system because the game is pretty difficult and getting far in a run is hard, but I'm excited to continue exploring what the upgrades can do for my run. The last gameplay aspect I want to touch on is the tech. Once you die and lose the run you're on, you're taken to a random van in a parking lot where you can spend your tech. The way it works is that 3 items are shown that you can unlock. When you unlock one, another takes its place, and so on. Currently, there's around 65 unlocks in the game, and the way it works is that when you unlock an item, it doesn't mean you start the run with that item, it just means that that weapon or armor will now show up in-game. My complaint with this system is that you can't choose from all 65 unlocks. You have only 3 at a time, which appear to come about randomly, and it forces you to possibly unlock something you don't want to show up in the game. In a weird way, it adds to the difficulty of the game, but I'm not a fan when a game forces random difficulty like that on you. I would prefer to be able to buy specific unlocks that play to how I want to enjoy the game. This loops us back around to my earlier complaint about unlocking the 4th character. My original thought was that I had to get to a certain place in the map to unlock the 4th character, but what I realized was that you actually unlock them with tech. Having to pay to unlock the 4th character is totally fine with me, but the issue was that I didn't have the option to save up for the character. I just had to wait for it to randomly appear in this van at the end of a run. If all 65 upgrades were available every time you finished a run and you could save up for the ones you wanted, I think the experience would be so much better. To conclude this section, let's look at the gameplay loop. It's nothing special, but overall it's good. The game is challenging, and as you learn to be better at combat and unlock better weapons, the game gets easier. The slow trickle of new weapons and armor being added keeps each run feeling fresh, and the bunker building aspect was also a fun and unique way to customize each run. Let's dive into the art, music, and VO. This is a pixely 90s looking game through and through. There's no getting past the art in this game. It is not pretty at all. To be fair, the whole concept is that you're raiding these corporate buildings that have a very fascist feel, so maybe they would have a lot of gray, but in my opinion that's no excuse for an ugly game. The grays and blacks provide a bleak feel and a nice contrast for the red blood and bright explosions, but it's also pretty drab. Luckily, the developer really makes up for the boring art with awesome music. I'm definitely no musical genre expert, but I would describe the soundtrack as nu metal with industrial and grunge leanings. To me, it was the perfect music for this game. It's what I imagine a future punk fighting the man would listen to while they bust up an area. The music also made me think of Doom 2016. One of the best feelings in that game was shooting hordes of demons while metal was playing in the background. There's no better way to make an average FPS player like myself feel like a complete boss than to blast metal in the background. In terms of the VO, there's so little of it that it's hard to judge. What there is mediocre, and it didn't stand out really in either direction. Now that we made it through the game, what are some of the positives and negatives? Let's break it down. First, on the positive side, Bunker Punks has solid shooting mechanics which are further improved by the large roster of weapons and enemies. Secondly, the overall feel of the game is on point. The developer was aiming to create a 90s FPS, and I think he hit the nail on the head. The feel of the narrative, the quick combat, and fun gameplay made for an experience that made me want to play run after run. On the negative side, the first thing I noticed was the art. Playing games like Celeste spoiled me because it showed off how beautiful pixel art can be. Obviously this is a completely different genre than Celeste, but the point is that this game doesn't look boring because of the pixel art, it looks boring because the art is drab. Secondly, this game lacked verticality. There's a chance that this changes in really late levels, but I doubt it. Besides some rooms having small platforms to jump on, you were stuck on the same vertical plane for the entire time. I think it would have made combat even more dynamic if some platforming elements were added where you could get up higher and change your plane of attack. Lastly, the progression of permanent upgrades was not enjoyable. It took way too long to unlock the fourth character, and the choice to limit unlocks of weapons and armor to 3 at a time seemed arbitrary. I have no doubt that my experience would have been improved if all the unlocks were available at the same time and only limited by tech cost. We've made it to the final boss. This is the part of the podcast where I let you know whether you should slay the game and buy it, flee the game and avoid it, or farm up and wait for a sale. My verdict is to farm up and wait for a sale. Bunker Punks is a solid core to the game, but there are too many negatives for me to recommend buying it straight up. If you're wanting a fun 90s era FPS, go ahead and grab it right away. Otherwise, I recommend to wait for it to be a little cheaper. As always, thank you all for listening in. If you had feedback on the episode, shoot me an email or contact me on Instagram or Facebook at Clutch Kitten Gaming or on Twitter at KKG Podcast. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button on whatever platform you listen on so that you get the latest episodes right away when they come out. I hope you all have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll see you in game.